Now we will take a deep dive into how AssetAccountant works with Sage Intacct to fully manage the accounting for leases. There are two types of leases that we will look at. Firstly, we will cover an asset that's been acquired using finance arrangements. Secondly, we will look at right-of-use assets. In order to demonstrate the first lease type, we will create an asset by means of a journal entry as we have previously described in the other Sage Intacct overview videos.
In order to demonstrate the first lease type, we will create the asset by means of a journal entry as shown in the overview videos. So let's just call this my leased asset. In there, I'm going to set that up into the clearing account for, let's say, 500,000 grand in there. So once that has been created and submitted to the GL, then we can move into AssetAccountant. We can refresh our draft asset screen, and that will bring up the leased asset. I'm going to add that asset. So let's just say that's some machinery this time, and we're going to post that to marketing. I can set the depreciation methods here, so my tax depreciation using the SARS methods. So let's just depreciate that over 25, 13, 13. And let's just say we're happy with the accounts depreciation. It's going to be a year straight line. So I can save that asset. That asset has now been added to the register. And you can see here, I can go into my leased asset. And then from here, I'm able to attach the lease. So I can put in the payment schedule, the amount that I'm financing. So let's do 50,000 initial payment and then 10,000 rand a month for 36 months, followed by a balloon of 140,000, gives us a nice interest rate. So I'll generate the schedule, and you can see the principal and the interest has been calculated for each payment. And then if I'm happy, I can use that schedule, save the schedule, and that now has created these lease entries in the system. So from here, I can run a journal. So if I go into my journals, I'll create the journal to the end of October, and that will produce all the line items, including the lease amount. So you can see here in the machinery and equipment, the lease liability of 550,000 has been set, with the interest components of that separately disclosed if you would like to report on those separately. And then the payment, the 50,000 rand payment, goes to the clearing account here so that you have an item to match against when that entry comes through the bank account. So once you've done that and you've posted it, you would then manage the asset. So if I go into my leased asset, there are some things you can do here to the lease. If you would like to refinance the lease, you can just do that from here, where you put in the refinanced amount and the date and the revised schedule for payment. AssetAccountant will also calculate the amounts that are due to be adjusted as a result of the refinance. In there, you can terminate the lease from here as well. So if you have finished the lease early, then you can just terminate the lease, either enter a buyout amount or a lease fee for termination if you have one of those, and we'll do the calculations for you. And then there is an option here for you to add multiple assets to a single lease. So if you are buying equipment where you have one lease, a master lease covering multiple assets, then it is possible to add those to the leases. In terms of reports that are available, you can see here there's a number of reports that are available for leasing. So you can see the reports such as the amounts paid over a 12-month period. The lease export report is a full export of all the data we have with leases. Lease expiry schedule shows when they're running out, and so on and so on. So there's multiple reports that are available for you to run for leasing. What I'll now show is a right of use asset. So if you have an asset that is a property lease or equipment hire where you're not owning the asset, then you can have what's called a right of use asset. So in here, let's just call that my right of use asset. I'm going to put that into, let's just say that's a building, and I'll choose right of use. The start date here, so let's say this is going to start today, And for right of use assets, I need the borrowing rate. So let's just say that's 5%. If I have a CPI uplift, I can do that from here. And then I'm just going to put in my payments. So let's just say I'm paying 100,000 rand a month for 5 years. So let's say 60 months. So that will do the calculation of the net present value of those payments, and will also do the split between the reduction of the lease liability and the interest on each of those. Down here, you can see this has worked out the end date for the lease, the amount capitalized here, which is based on the net present value of the payment flows and an amount financed. You can adjust this if you have things like lease incentives and so on, if necessary. And then down here, you would set the depreciation method. So generally for right of use assets, that would be doesn't exist because that's not an asset for tax purposes. And then you would have this as the accounts method, which is straight line over the life of the lease. So that's going to be a 20% method. That's there. So I can save that. And then you can see here, as with the asset finance lease, this has created both the asset and the lease and is depreciating the asset over the life of it and managing the lease liability as you go down. As with asset finance leases, this will also create the journal entries. So if I create an adjusting journal to the end of October, you can see the right of use asset has been added to the asset group here. In this case, it's a building asset. And the lease liability has also been set up in the books. And similarly with the other journals, you're able to just post that direct to Intacct from this page here. There are some other things you can do in relation to this asset. So the right of use asset, similar to asset finance, it is possible to change it. So let's say in a year's time, there was an adjustment made. So let's say your IBR has changed at that point of view. And for the remainder of the lease, you're going to be paying 110,000 rand per month. Then you can just do the calculation there, use the schedule, and then you'll have the option to adjust the right of use asset as well for the adjustment in the lease, which is what you would normally do. So I can refinance that lease. And then if I scroll down here, you can see that the lease refinance has added the additional refinanced amount to both the asset and the lease to correctly account for the modification that's taken place in the lease. That will also show up in the next journal. And finally, you can see the impact of that in one of the lease reports, the right of use movement report. So if I do a start date of, let's just do that for October 2026, there you'll be able to see the effect of the lease modification in there. So we've got my right of use asset. The asset's been changed by 394,000 rand, and so has the lease liability, reflecting the impact of the change in lease payment amount at the time it was made. So that is an overview of how AssetAccountant works with Sage Intacct to manage leases for use in South Africa. We can do both asset finance leases, where you can have one or multiple assets on a single lease, and also right of use assets are also available. For further information on this, please see our website, www.asset.accountant.